on this beautiful day, and especially gathering for this great occasion of the anniversary of our chime. Can you hear? Okay. Our 150-year-old chime is an important part of the industrial and religious and liturgical and musical history of Troy. And so we're really grateful to be able to celebrate today. Now, how the day is going to go is that we have a few remarks to begin with. And then we're going to be having a chimes concert. These are things that are chosen from the original 1870 concert and also augmented by choices from our very own parish. And then there's going to be a documentary created by one of our two chimers, Lydia Smith, and we're going to be showing that in the sanctuary. So we have remarks, concert, and then a documentary in the sanctuary. I think I neglected to introduce myself. I'm Mother Judith Malionek. I'm the rector here at St. John's here in Troy. And in a moment, Andy Mace, who just played our chimes, is going to be coming down and speaking to us for just a couple of minutes. Right now, then, I would like to take a moment to thank the people who made this day so possible. And especially, I would like to thank the people who were on the organizing committee: Chris Salmon, Dave Hunn, Andy Mace, Lydia Smith, Lois Hodkinson, Donna Rem, and Jason Smith. Now, I'm going to go ahead and introduce Andy as he makes his way down from the tower. Andy has been a part of our parish since he was 4 years old. He was a choir boy way back in the day, and it was actually a paid position, so we were underpaying Andy even back when he was 4 and 5 years old. And he's been a part of our musical life here ever since. So we're really delighted to have Andy as our head chimer. And here he is.
Hi, my name is Andy, and Lydia and I will be your chimers this afternoon. I do want to thank you all for being here on the 150th anniversary of our chime here at St. John's. I'm honored to be a part of this celebration. First things first, I want to make clear that the bells you hear today are not the original ones from the West Troy Meneely Foundry as played on September 11th, 1870. Those bells were replaced in March 1911 with a similar 11-bell chime from the Meneely Bell Company of Troy. In a few minutes, I will let Michael Barrett explain more about the two Meneely Bell Companies and other bell foundries in and around Troy. It's quite a history. In an odd sort of way, this event brings things full circle, if you will. If you read either of the handouts, you will recognize the name Peter McGoldrick as the person who played that first concert here in 1870. I discovered that Mr. McGoldrick was the first person to play the chime installed at the Cathedral of the Immaculate Conception in Albany in 1862, and he continued to do so for several years. Presumably, his reputation as a chimer was good enough for us at St. John's. Sadly, that cathedral chime sat dormant through much of the 20th century and well into the 21st century, until a friend of mine, the late Joe Connors, whom I'm sure many of you know or knew, managed to pretty much single-handedly repair and restore that chime to working order. In December 2012, for its 150th anniversary, the chime at the cathedral was played again, and I was honored to be one of those fortunate enough to take part in that event. By now, some of you are way ahead of me and have figured out the full circle connection between Peter McGoldrick and me, Peter being the first to play both that cathedral chime and ours at their respective debuts, and I fortunate enough to have been able to partake in 150th anniversary celebrations of each chime. For as long as I can remember, chimers here at St. John started at a fairly young age, maybe 10, 12 years old. Often they were also members of the choir. Some just came and went. It was little more than a novelty that quickly wore off. For others, playing the chime was something we weren't so quick to leave behind at, say, high school graduation. My sister Trina continued to play the chime at the Thompson Memorial Chapel at Williams College. My friend Henry Stewart actually received a stipend for playing the Bachelor Memorial Chime at St. Lawrence University. By the way, both of those are similar chimes to ours from the Troy Meneely Company. Meanwhile, I remained here, attending college at SUNY Albany and continuing to play our chime. A number of former chimers have returned to St. John's to visit over the years and have made the way to the tower one more time. Our current second chimer, Lydia, is another who has embraced our chime with a passion rivaling mine. After only a few years of playing, she plays with great flair and enthusiasm. That enthusiasm has evolved beyond simply playing to the point where she is wrapping up a major project for her Girl Scout Gold Award, transcribing hymns, organizing music, and more, all to make it easier for anyone in the future who might be tempted to play. In my ideal world, Lydia will choose a college close to home so she can continue to play regularly. But if not, I'm sure she'll play whatever she comes back here to visit. Oh, and I should add that our own Mother Judith took an immediate liking to our chime on her arrival here and started playing it until an injury sidelined her earlier this summer. I know she will be back in the tower soon. And by the way, we have her to thank for transcribing some of the tunes you will hear today. Speaking of injuries, segue's a segue, right? There is a significant physicality to playing the chime. Climbing the ladder to the tower side, it takes about 30 pounds of downward pressure. Yes, I measured it, but that's a story for another time. To get a decent sound from any of the bells. And a single verse of the simplest hymn might have 24, maybe as much as 50 notes or more. That adds up to quite the workout. Of course, that effort to get to the tower and the effort required to play manually has led to many chime installations being electrified over the years. Certainly, it is far easier to play on a small piano-style keyboard located more conveniently by the organ or elsewhere in the church proper, rather than climbing up into a tower. But in doing so, one does surrender control over volume and other expression. That said, and in another example of things coming full circle, the Mohawk Hudson Industrial Gateway is in the midst of a project that accomplishes pretty much the opposite. Utilizing recorded sounds of actual bells and some mechanical and computer wizardry, visitors to the Burden Iron Museum will soon be able to play the 12 bells of St. Joseph's Roman Catholic Church in South Troy. Their bells were electrified many years ago, but the original chime stand survives, soon to be virtually reunited with its bells. I would now like to introduce Michael Barrett, Executive Director of the Hudson Mohawk Industrial Gateway, to tell you a bit of the history of bell making in and around Troy, as well as how a real chime stand will soon play virtual bells. Michael?
Many people, including a number of locals, are unaware that we are standing at this moment within a 1-mile radius of the 4 largest bell-making concerns in the New World. Between 1808 and 1952, those 4 companies are believed to have produced in excess of 100,000 bells. We have spreadsheets on our website. We have just a hair under 70,000 of those bells identified at 10,000 plus locations. It is absolutely astonishing where they are around the world. And I will mention 2 of the most famous American-made bells were made literally right behind that house over at 22 River Street, Troy, New York. We'll get back to that in a minute. The industry starts here in 1808 when Colonel Benjamin Hanks moves his foundry from Mansfield, Connecticut, over across the river from where we're standing at this moment in what was then called Gibbonsville, New York, later to be called West Troy, later to be called Watervliet. The kernel has been cut off from European trade by the Embargo Act of 1808. Jefferson and the Congress are trying to keep us out of the Napoleonic Wars, and so they forbid trade with the warring powers in Europe. The colonel is smart enough to recognize the only growth potential he still has is out the Mohawk River Valley, out to the Midwestern states and the brand new territories that we have acquired in the Louisiana Purchase. His foundry makes small brass cannon, bells, and surveying instruments, including compasses and surveyor's quadrants. He builds his foundry exactly where the Watervliet Library stands today, directly across the river from us. He hands over the operations to his son Julius in 1809. Julius hires, among others, a young apprentice by the name of Andrew Meneely, a Scots-Irish immigrant family who arrived here in 1795. Andrew was born in 1802. He apprentices with Julius at the foundry in Gibbonsville. In 1823, at the conclusion of his apprenticeship, he moves out to Auburn, New York, where he goes into business with Julius's younger brother, Horatio. It is there that Andrew meets Horatio's cousin, Philena Hanks, and marries her. 1825, Julius, across the river, decides that there's better business opportunities in downtown Troy, and so he packs up his things and moves to what is today Fulton and Fifth, exactly where the Gurley building stands today. Julius runs his business for several years. Eventually, he turns over management to his own son, Oscar, in 1834. Oscar really likes making precision instruments. He doesn't like making bells so much. He's the one who ends up hiring two bright young RPI graduates named William and Louis E. Gurley, who come into the business with him. And of course, when Oscar retires in 1845, the Gurley brothers take over in a business that exists to this day, W&L.E. Gurley. Andrew, however, realizing that the West Troy facility is now vacant, moves back from Auburn, takes over that facility, and begins producing his own bells, compasses, surveyors, quadrants, etc. He is fairly successful early on, but he has some health issues. In 1836, he takes in a partner who stays with him for 5 years. And then after Mr. Oothout leaves in 1841, Andrew continues the business himself until 1849, when his eldest son, Edwin, comes into the business with him, and the company name changes to Andrew Meneely and Son. In 1850, Andrew and Edwin cast the first known American-made chime set of 9 bells. They make it for the American Institute exhibition, which is being held down in New York City. It receives the gold medal at that exhibition, but as far as we can tell, that set of 9 bells was never hung in any church. And here I'm going to take a very quick minute. Early on in the bell industry, you could make individual bells, and whatever tone they rang was pretty much hit or miss. I mean, whatever sound it made is what you sold it as. It's an E, it's an F, who cares? It's a single bell, who cares what note it is? As the technology improves, they reached a point where they could actually change the molds that made the bells, and you could come up with a pretty close approximation of what note you wanted. And so they began to sell what were called peals of bells, 3 or 5 bells, usually tuned to the 1st, 3rd, 5th, and 8th tones of a major scale. I'm not a musician. This comes right out of the book. But the peals would actually swing. As the technology continues to improve, they were able, starting in 1850, to come up with a chime set, which by definition is between 8 and 15 stationary bells. And when I say stationary, despite what the movies want you to believe, most bells in towers do not swing. Trust me when I say to you the destructive force of 30,000 pounds of bell metal swinging back and forth in your tower is the stuff that architects have nightmares over. The bells hang stationary, and you use rods and straps to work small devices that either internally or externally strike the bell. You have 25 pounds moving instead of 1,800 pounds per individual bell. Anyway, chimes are perfect for playing simple melodies, and then eventually they reached a point where carillons, which are 23 or more bells, often, most always, 2 octaves, possibly as many as 4, with all the sharps and flats, and you can play very complicated melodies with those. But, got off on a tangent. In 1851, Andrew Meneely dies over across the river. He's buried up in Albany Rural Cemetery. His younger son, George, comes into the business with his brother, Edwin, and it becomes Andrew Meneely's Sons. In 1852, Andrew's brother-in-law, James Hitchcock, who's been working for Andrew for a number of years, apparently chafing under the management style of the 2 nephews, leaves him and hooks up with a fella named Aber Jones, and they open the 3rd bell foundry. The building still stands right here at Adams and First Street, today owned by Best Fire. The brick building across from Carmen's Cafe, that was the Jones and Company Troy Bell Foundry. And Aber Jones, who's the money man, lived right here across the street at number 151 First Street. And for those who like local personalities, Aber Jones is the great-great-grandfather of today's E. Stewart Jones, Esquire. And that's his house. Anyway, so that's the 3rd. The Jones Troy Bell Foundry casts and installs the first ever recorded American chime set. That's in 1853. It's another 9-bell set. It is hung in the belfry at St. Stephen's in Philadelphia, New York, or Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, excuse me. And it totals just a hair under 13,000 pounds. In 1857, Mr. Hitchcock retires from the Troy Bell Foundry, and when Aber dies in 1867, his son Octavius, who lives in that house, took over management of the Troy Bell Foundry and ran it until he closed it for business in 1887. Back across the river, the Waterville Meneelys, the business fails in 1857, and Andrew's widow, Philena, steps in and takes over management and runs the company for the next 6 years and gets it back into financial equilibrium. When in 1863 she retires, the 2 boys rename the company EA and GR Meneely Company, and then in 1874 it's changed to Meneely and Company. But, and here's one of the great stories in our local fighting families. In 1861, the 3rd son of Andrew Meneely, Clinton, who has been working as a clerk for his brothers over across the river, against family wishes, enlists in the Army for the Civil War. He comes back in 1866, having risen from buck private to bird colonel. For those of you who have military experience, you will understand what a meteorize that is. He gets home, he says to his beloved brothers over across the river, "Hey, beloved brothers, I'm home. What do you want me to do? Where do you want me to go?" And their reply is something along the line of, "Well, you can go anywhere you please, do anything you want, because we own this and you're not welcome." Well, Clinton's brother-in-law, who's working for the brothers, Kimberly, excuse me, George says, "Well, I know how to do this. Why don't you and I open our own bell foundry?" And so in 1867, the two of them buy the property right behind this brick across from me, over on River Street, number 22, and they build a brand new bell foundry, which is called Meneely and Kimberly. And you gotta love this. It's the one spot on this side of the river where every day when his brothers leave the office in West Troy to go home, the first thing they see on this side is the competing Meneely Bell Foundry. "Hey, my brothers, I learned how to speak South Troy." Sorry, yeah. They sue Clinton saying, "You can't use the Meneely name because we own that." Well, that runs all the way to 1875 when the New York State Court of Appeals says, nah, as long as he's using his own name and he's not defrauding people, he's entitled to use it. Still known as the Meneely Rule. Anyway, I mentioned the two most famous bells. Both of those are made by Clinton Meneely right over here at 22 River Street. In 1876, the Philadelphians, looking to celebrate the centennial of the Declaration of Independence, do not have a bell to ring because that piece of British junk kept cracking on them. So they hire Clinton Meneely here in Troy to make them a 13,000-pound bell that hangs to this day in Independence Hall in Philadelphia, tolling every hour. If you happen to have seen the movie National Treasure with Nicolas Cage, he allegedly runs through the tower getting away from the bad guys. We've been in the tower. There's 14 inches from the edge of the bell to the wall. Nobody runs past it. It's CGI, trust me on that. But the bell is there, and it's 13,000 pounds of Troy bell metal. And the other famous bell, in 1915, the suffragettes had a 2,000-pound bell made by Clinton, right here, that is an exact replica of the British Liberty Bell that kept cracking. It has the same inscriptions, except it adds 2 words. Let this ring out freedom and equality to all. That was mounted on a truck that the suffragettes took on a national tour, raising funding and consciousness for the passage of what would eventually become the 19th Amendment. The oddity of the Women's Liberty Bell, they had the clapper soldered to the wall, so as they took it on the tour and they would set the bell to swinging, it would not make a sound because women had no voice. Oh. The night that the 19th Amendment took effect, they cut the clapper free and they rang the bell for the first time, hearing the note that they'd been waiting for all those years. The Meneleys on this side of the river continue in business until 1952. Over across the river, they shut down by 1951. Both of them are the victims of metal shortages of World War II and Korea, compounded by the advent of electronic chimes. You no longer have to have 30,000 pounds of metal in your belfry. You can have 4 huge speakers aimed in the 4 directions and play music off a keyboard, as Andy likes to say. But I will close, well, 2 issues, because Andy asked me to add another. Of the 555 known chime sets that exist today in America, the West Troy Meneleys made 195 of those sets. The Troy Meneleys made 165 sets. The Jones-Troy Bell Foundry made 22. So those three foundries alone produced 382 of the 555 chime sets. That's 69% of the chime sets known in America were made within a mile of where you're sitting at this moment. Now, Andy mentioned the St. Joseph's chime set, St. Joseph's Roman Catholic, a mile south of us. We were given their wooden chime stand. We are in the middle of a project. It should have been done by now, but 2020 is one bizarre year. We have digitally recorded the 12 bells at St. Joseph's. I have, well, now I was going to say he's a PhD candidate. In May, he got his PhD. Ezra Tebble of RPI and Dr. Seth Cluett of Columbia University have been working on the software and the electrical work needed to have a digital ability to play the chime stand in the Burden Museum, a half a mile from St. Joseph's, and you will actually get the feeling. We got storm door closers, so Andy's 30 pounds of pressure. You actually have the ability to feel the pressure back. It's a great project. I thought it was going to be up and running by June. Sorry about that, but it's coming. So pay attention to our website, HudsonMohawkGateway.org, and you'll be able to come down and play the bells. And I know I've gone over. Mother, forgive me.
The concert you're about to hear are selections from the original 1870 concert, as well as selections from our congregation here at St. John's, Troy. I trust you will, that's good. The concert you're about to hear are selections from the 1870 concert and things that we have added as a congregation, 20 more things. It's a real Olympic kind of concert. And so please welcome Andy and Lydia at the chimes.